We all know the phenomenon of fake news. It's been a recurring topic ever since the rise of social media. But what if I told you that fake news were always a thing, and that very often dates and events were fabricated such as to serve a certain political narrative? This is still being done today and has always been done by the people in power. And one such case is the famous story of the fall of Rome in 476 AD. And this would prove such an incredibly powerful fake news that even today, 1500 years later, we still fall for that invention. So much so that Wikipedia entries and even history books all refer to the fall of Rome in 476. But how and why was it fabricated? When the last Western Roman Emperor Romulus Augustus was deposed on September 4th, 476 AD by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer, one powerless ruler was deposed and the barbarian general was now governing directly over Italy. This is now often quoted as the fall of the Western Roman Empire. However, Romulus Augustus, also often called Augustulus, the small Augustus, did not hold any real power. He was a child of around 11 years of age by 476, and the military of the Western Roman Empire, if it can even be called an empire by that time, was strongly in the hand of Germanic foederati. And this was by no means a new phenomenon. Already 80 years earlier, a half-Vandal general called Flavius Stilicho was holding the real power in the Western Roman Empire, and the child emperor Honorius was effectively for a long time just a puppet. This process accelerated more when the Western Empire started its decline, and especially after the Magister Militum Ricimer took control in 457, the emperors would more often than not be puppets. Majorian and Anthemius represent two heroic exceptions, but emperors such as Libius Severus or Olybrius were just puppets of Ricimer, and Glycerius was just a puppet of Ricimer's Burgundian nephew Gundobad. The Western Roman throne was sometimes vacant for many months before a new emperor was chosen, such as for example from 456 to 457. So that day in 476 was nothing unusual for the Romans. In fact, the event got no attention whatsoever from contemporaries in the West or the East. There was no outcry, no lamentation of a fall. Life in the city of Rome continued unchanged in 476. The Senate was still meeting, the urban prefect of Rome still elected, consuls were still chosen in the West. Rome was still Roman. Even in Ravenna, not much had changed. Instead of an 11-year-old powerless emperor, who was in fact just a puppet of his father Flavius Orestes, now a Germanic general was sitting on the throne. Life went on as normal, even in Ravenna. The imperial regalia were sent to Constantinople, and Odoacer was officially ruling in the name of the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno in Constantinople. Nobody was speaking of a fall of Rome. In fact, this was often seen as a reunification of the empire, where Italy was now a province of the Roman Empire instead of its own separate Western Empire. When Theodoric came to Italy on orders of Zeno himself, he overthrew Odoacer after some years of war, and thus the Ostrogothic kingdom was born in 493. But still, nobody was speaking of a fall. On the contrary, especially the first decades of Theodoric's long rule were seen by many as a rebirth of the Western Roman Empire. Sicily was regained from the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths successfully campaigned against the Rugi and incorporated their kingdom into the realm of Theodoric. This Ostrogothic kingdom was not only larger but also more stable than the Western Roman Empire after the death of Majorian in 461. And when Theodoric stayed in Rome in AD 500 for more than half a year, he entered the city, as Cassiodorus writes, like a second Trajan. The procession of Theodoric through the city felt to many like the imperial triumphs of old. Nobody was speaking of decline. Instead, renewal and imperial rebirth were being proclaimed. And please like this video and subscribe so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating era of the late Roman Empire. And please consider supporting our work on Patreon or via YouTube membership, because unfortunately the long-term sustainability of this channel really depends on your support. YouTube is not really generous to such a niche topic about the fall of the Roman Empire, and the ad revenue from the videos is incredibly low. So in order to be long-term sustainable, unfortunately, I really need your financial support via Patreon or YouTube membership, as sorry as I am to say this. But I think Maiorian would thank you for supporting a channel bearing his name, and I certainly do thank you very much, my friends. Gratias ago tibi amici. In fact, one could argue that the ascension of Theodoric marked the rebirth of the Western Roman Empire. After 510, Theodoric even reigned effectively over the Visigothic kingdom as a regent of his infant grandson Amalaric. This was indeed seen by many as the resurgence of a new Western Roman Empire. Theodoric himself presented himself in the fashion of the old Roman emperors and meticulously preserved ancient Roman traditions and laws. He allotted tax revenue for the restoration and protection of the old imperial buildings of Rome. He issued coins of notably higher quality than in the last decades of the Western Roman Empire, appearing like a Western Roman emperor himself, except for the mustache, which was distinctly Germanic, in order to underscore the parallels to old Rome, but also in order to retain some Germanic identity. The Roman senators Magnus Aurelius Cassiodorus, Senator, and Anicius Manlius Severinus Boetius of the old Roman aristocratic family of the Anici were statesmen in Rome under Theodoric's rule, treating him by all means and accounts as a Western Roman emperor. Boetius even held the ancient office of consul in 510. Cassiodorus gives us detailed accounts of the surprisingly good state of the city of Rome in the early 6th century. I talked about that in this video here. But then after 520, the relations between the East and West began to worsen. Theodoric had Boetius executed in 524 on grounds of treason. Being a member of the old Anici family, the Eastern Roman Anici were outraged. Tensions began to rise between the Eastern Roman Empire and this new Western Roman Empire under Germanic rule. It is in that time that Marcellinus Comes would for the first time introduce the concept of the fall of Rome in 476. He was a Latin chronicler of the Eastern Roman Empire who spent most of his life at the court of Constantinople. Justinian, the new ambitious emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, needed a justification to invade the West. So Marcellinus Comes gave him one, namely that the West had been taken over by barbarians in 476 and that the Roman Empire had died in that year. It is in his work Annales that we can read for the first time about the fall of Rome in that year. This new viewpoint legitimized military actions against the West, as now suddenly the Romans living in the West were not part of a new resurgent Western Roman Empire of Germanic rule, but subjects to a hostile takeover of barbarians that were portrayed as brutally suppressing the native Roman population. It was a mistake of Theodoric to execute Boetius and others, such as Memmius Symmachus, because that would give the Eastern Roman writers a powerful topic to be used as propaganda. This made the Germanic rulers appear like bloodthirsty tyrants, where an invasion of the West now seemed necessary in order to liberate the poor Romans from this tyranny. Of course, the previous 30 years of very benevolent rule by Theodoric were not important anymore. Thus it was by Marcellinus Comes that the date of 476 was posthumously rebranded as the Fall of Rome, simply because a ruler of Italic Roman descent was switched for a Germanic one. Now the pretext was there, and by 535 the war with the Ostrogothic kingdom had begun. By 553 the war was over, but Italy completely devastated and destroyed. What could have been the real resurgence of a new Western Roman Empire, with ever-increasing degree of Romanized rulers, until at some point new Italic Western Roman emperors might have ruled, was utterly destroyed in its infancy. This Gothic War proved to be a giant catastrophe, and it effectively ended late antiquity and plunged Italy into the Dark Ages. I talked extensively about the disastrous effects which that war had onto Italy and onto Rome in these videos here. But so powerful did this Eastern Roman propaganda of Marcellinus Comes prove that later writers would copy that narrative from him. And so it was that even until this very day, most people still fall for this fabricated propaganda narrative of an Eastern Roman chronicler from 1500 years ago. And if you are interested in what the Gothic Wars did to Italy, you can watch this video here in the upper right corner. But if you are more interested in the consequences for Rome itself, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias amici imperii Romani, and bene valete.